When citizens want to push back against the government, they pull out the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. By taking to the streets with this document, they are using it as a literal shield to protect themselves from state overreach. The Charter outlines passive freedoms, like the freedom to practice a religion, gather peacefully, or speak your mind. These are designed as natural spaces where the government is legally required to step back, creating a vacuum so you can act without state interference. But think about the practical reality of a society where freedom to act is entirely absolute. If there are zero restrictions on what you can say or do, what happens next? A legal system built exclusively on unchecked individual autonomy becomes incredibly dangerous. Eventually, one person's absolute freedom to act will violently collide with the safety and rights of the people around them. Without boundaries, you create a society where whoever is the loudest or strongest dictates the rules. This lack of restriction leaves minority populations and vulnerable groups entirely exposed to harassment, discrimination, and physical harm. To avoid that chaos, authoritarian governments opt for total suppression. In North Korea, the state prevents societal friction by ensuring individual autonomy simply doesn't exist. By exercising absolute control over the internet, media, and public gatherings, regimes maintain strict order. It is a zero-sum approach. The state holds all the power, and the citizen holds none. A functioning democracy has to reject both of these extremes. It has to engineer a system that navigates the volatile space between total societal chaos on one side and complete authoritarian control on the other. This legal document explicitly addresses that exact dilemma. Right at the top of the Charter, you find Section 1, commonly known as the Reasonable Limits Clause. Section 1 is a calibration tool. Your freedoms aren't natural absolutes, but structures designed to be restricted when necessary. The government can't limit autonomy arbitrarily. To restrict a right, they must prove the limitation is fair and necessary to protect the public. The purpose of this clause is to draw a firm boundary around the community. It stops individuals from weaponizing their freedoms against the people around them. You can see exactly where these hard stops are located by testing the individual freedoms. You have the freedom of expression, allowing you to criticize the government and share unpopular opinions. But you cross the boundary the moment expression turns into a direct threat or hate speech. When your expression actively endangers a vulnerable group, Section 1 steps in to override your individual autonomy for the sake of the collective. The same logic applies to the freedom of assembly. You can gather and protest a cause, but protection ends if your demonstration becomes violent or blocks emergency services from doing their jobs. You also have the freedom of religion, meaning you can practice any faith you choose. However, you cannot use your religious beliefs as a legal shield to bypass criminal laws. In each of these cases, the government is making a highly specific, surgical intervention. They are restricting the exact action causing harm rather than erasing the underlying freedom entirely. Contrast this calibration with global authoritarian standards. A dictatorship does not need a legal excuse to silence you. They suppress the population by default. Section 1 forces a completely different dynamic. In Canada, when the government wants to restrict a freedom, the state itself is put on trial. It bears the entire burden of proof to legally justify to the courts exactly why limiting a citizen is necessary. This creates a measured democracy. It requires constant, active weighing of your individual power against the state's obligations to keep society safe. Forcing the government to legally fight for every single restriction creates massive friction. That friction is the exact mechanism keeping the democracy from sliding backward into an authoritarian state. But the Charter does not place all the obligations onto the government alone. It operates as a dual-purpose system that relies heavily on you. For every active right and passive freedom you hold, the framework assigns you a corresponding civic duty. The privileges you enjoy are explicitly tied to your actions as a citizen. That duty is the obligation to protect the rest of your community. You have to respect the safety, rights, and freedoms of the people around you while you are exercising your own. A fair society does not exist simply because people are allowed to do whatever they want. It survives through a carefully calibrated balance, where individual power only works because it is matched with community responsibility.